Alright, this is going to be how to import map data from the OpenStreetMap project into Blender and make the necessary edits to convert it to a 3D printable STL. Prerequisites for this are setting up Blender for 3D printing. I used the 3D Printing Professor's Blender setup tutorial, and then also installing the blender-osm plugin. So to get started, open up the OSM menu, click on Select. This will pop up a browser window where you can select the area you want to do. Now, as a nod to the 3D Printing Professor, I believe he lives near St. George. So why don't we select Dixie State University. So we'll zoom in onto that, get this selection rectangle, and just kind of narrow down on the campus there. And we'll select copy here and come back to Blender, paste that in there. I'll start by importing the terrain and then importing the OpenStreetMap data. And I'm just going to turn a couple of these off. I'm only really going to deal with roads and buildings here. Import. Then let's zoom out a little bit. Select everything except my build plate. And shrink that down to something we could print. Oh yes, and then also move this down close to the build plate. So first we'll start by grabbing the terrain, then going into edit mode. So we will extrude that, hit Z until we get global Z, drag that so it's below the build plate, so we can cut that off. Select build plate and the terrain. Go into object mode. Difference those so that cuts it off flat. Then we can come back here and start selecting the different objects we're interested in using. I'm going to skip some of these and just do the main roads. So, motorway, when you go into edit mode, you can actually see that these are two-dimensional lines that are actually hovering over the terrain and then are projected down onto it. So what we need to do, back in object mode, convert those to a mesh, then go to edit it, select all, extrude, hit Z to get the global Z, and then I'm entering in 0.4 millimeters, which I think is a decent amount for it to show up in a 3D print. Then, same thing with these others. Let's see. residential, object, convert, mesh, edit mode, select all, extrude, switch to global Z, 0.4 millimeters. Find your next one. Object, convert to mesh, edit mode, select all, extrude, global Z, 0.4. Service roads, convert to a mesh, edit, select all, extrude, global Z, 0.4. Do this with all of them. And now we can come back here and see that all these roads are now three-dimensional, bumping up. I didn't do these paths, they won't show up in this one. But now we can select everything except the build plate, export it as an STL. Make sure you do selection only when you export that, and that should do it for you. Okay, one thing to note with this is when you go to slice it, depending on how large of an area and what scale you're putting it at, some of the finer details can be smaller than your 3D printer can render, smaller than your nozzle diameter, and as such they may not show up when you go to slice it. In this case, in order to get these small details, I had to go in and set detect thin walls in order to get them to print single width traces. But aside from that, it looks like it'll work just fine.